Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode of Only a Bag in Italy Travel Podcast. I'm Nathaniel Malor.
And I'm Darcy Melton.
Thank you all so much for coming back to another episode. Today we are going to be talking about the Venice Carnavale. And just as a small heads up, Darcy's a bit under the weather.
I'm a bit sick, but I'm okay. I've had lots of coffee, so I'm excited. I'm ready to go. But I sound probably kind of funny.
She's going to power through. I think she had what I had last week. We sound like we get sick a lot, and I promise we don't. I think part of it is we record only 4 episodes a month. So I think when we are sick for one of them, it ends up looking like we're sick a lot. But also we were sick, or you were sick, at least a couple of weeks last year. Mm-hmm. And that was almost...
And I rarely get sick.
Yeah.
That was a really bad time. Yeah.
I feel like I get sick like once a week practically. I'm like, oh, I'm feeling run down today. I'm just going to take a day off. But you're rarely sick. So with that being said, we don't often get sick, but it does give the impression that we are sickly people. My immune system is pretty much just doesn't work. So I don't know what that's about. I need to figure that one out.
I sneeze a lot, but I just have weird allergies.
That's a good point. Yeah. So hopefully no one will be sneezed on today. That's the dream.
We will not sneeze on you today. We
Yes.
can assure you that.
We can assure you that. And I think that's everything. We don't have any news necessarily to talk about, so we're going to kind of just jump right into the Carnevale episode. But if I may really quickly plug for ourselves, thank you all so much for listening to this podcast. We really do appreciate it. If you'd like to leave a review, you absolutely can on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. For those of you who have read reviews, have left reviews, also, yeah, read the reviews while you're there. They're kind of fun. We love reading the reviews that are there, but I think that's because they're about us, so we really like that. But if you'd like to leave us a review, you can do so. We genuinely appreciate it. We have already, I think we just hit 25 total reviews. We're very excited by that. I think it's like 14 on Apple and 11 on Spotify. So thank you to everybody who has left a review. And if you'd like to check out some articles, we have a website, onlyabag.com. As we mentioned in, I think 2 episodes ago, we have started running ads on the website, technically, in the sense of we go through a Google AdSense, so they do it for us. It's an experimental thing. We're only doing it for a few months to see how it works, to see if it's something that annoys people or doesn't. If you do not like ads, I highly recommend using an ad block. We use uBlock Origin. There are other ones out there. Just to make it easier to navigate the site without ads. I think DuckDuckGo on the browser on the phone, if you use that, it's an ad-free browser, so you won't see the ads pop up. We do not mind if you don't want to see ads. We totally understand. It is annoying, but we try to make them as unobtrusive as possible. Mm-hmm. And lastly, we have a Blue Sky. We are at Only a Bag on Blue Sky. I think it's because we use onlyabag.com, our handle. So if you'd like to follow us there, you can. We are going to be shutting down our Instagram since we never really post. And it seems like podcasts do better on a text medium than on a image medium, a visual medium, in terms of just, we wanted to have a place where we can easily send out a message of there won't be a podcast today, or it'll come out late, or little updates like that, or mini-sode, or coming out tomorrow kind of thing. And we realize it's difficult to do that on Instagram. Plus, there's not a lot of crossover, I think, between people who listen to podcasts maybe, and then also want to follow them on Instagram. It seems like those are 2 totally different groups of people. So this has been a very long introduction. Thank you for bearing with me. Without further ado, did you have anything else to add?
Nope,
is that everything?
Good. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. Sorry. Every time I'm in charge, I feel like, of the podcast, quote unquote, in charge, I'm like just rambling. I apologize.
That's your vibe in life.
It really is my vibe. So without further ado, let's talk about Carnevale. And what is Carnevale, I think, is a big one, just as someone who doesn't know, I think, because I didn't grow up. I'm still not religious. Yeah. I'm not religious. I didn't grow up religious. I just assumed it was a holiday, like a parade. I didn't realize it was a religious thing.
But it doesn't have a religious
flavor
sense. Yes, but also I think coming from the U.S., we're a lot more familiar with the Brazil Carnevale.
Yes,
which
for sure.
Is amazing. I've never actually seen it in person, but it seems amazing. But this is the OG, right? The one in Venice.
So it seems like it's the original, at least in sense of it might have started as an original one, and then it was discontinued in the late 1700s. For those of you who want a fun, very brief little history lesson.
I do.
Well, fantastic. Okay, that's one of you. And if you're at home, you could go ahead and raise your hand. Not that we can see that, but I like that feeling we're involved in your lives or something. Darcy's giving a weird look. I don't know. I'm rambling. So, I've had like 5 cups of coffee at this point. So, a fun little history lesson is it started at some point in the 1100s. People think it's hard to put an actual number on it, but a lot of the laws around it came into effect in the 1300s. When I say laws around the Carnevale, I do mean specifically how to dress, how to act, wearing the masks, which we'll get into in a little bit. And it was pretty much in full force until 1797 when the Venetian Republic fell. The new guy, I think it was an Austrian emperor, came in, basically was like, no more Carnevale, no more masks, no more none of that stuff.
Party pooper, a.k.a.
Pretty much party pooper. And so between 1797 and 1979, so I love that they just kind of kept the same numbers but in a different order, there was no Carnevale, and it was basically resuscitated and renovated and redone in 1979. And we've talked about this before too. It seems like between like the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, there was a lot of like a resurgence in the Renaissance, for lack of a better word. I mean, I know that Ren fairs have been, but I feel like even in America, Ren fair, like Renaissance fairs, were like huge in the 70s and 80s. It feels like, just like, because like my mom, born in 1970, not to call her out, but she was like, oh yeah, I remember Ren fairs from like the 80s. Like that was a big thing. Like, you know, that was the thing that you went to. My dad, of course, does not remember the Ren fairs because I feel like he didn't realize those things existed. But I think there's a moment in time where it was sort of like we were all looking at the Renaissance like, oh, that was kind of fun. Like, let's do that again.
I think there was definitely, especially in Italy, a resurgence of festivals.
For sure.
I do feel like there were many religious festivals that continued, and the processions I think we've talked about before, and things that were, you know, quite specifically religious that continued for a long time and weren't halted. But I think we've mentioned before just other festivals that were stopped in like the 16 and 1700s that were then revamped in the late 20th century.
Yeah, and even the town where we live in, there's this famous 1,000-egg omelet festival, which is a really fun thing, I guess, have a festival about. They essentially make an omelet with 1,000 eggs and then cut it up and give everybody
a piece. It's like a giant panini press that they make an omelet on.
Yeah, and they flip it, and it's like eggs fall everywhere. It's a disaster. It's amazing. I don't understand it. It's a lot of pageantry.
They do a play, sort of like a reenactment before. It's very cool.
But it's also not for like somebody from town necessarily. Like they hire a troupe to come in and do it, and there's like a gun salute thing. Again, a troupe comes in and does it. We don't have people in town with like ancient muskets. I mean, it's fantastic. But it's also that I think that was restarted in the 90s based off of an event that may or may not have happened in the 1700s. So I think in the 90s, 80s, 90s, and this was in the 70s, there was a resurgence, and even at the Carnevale itself, there was something that was like, traditionally it was a person would cross the Piazza San Marco. It was called the like al volo, like the flight of the dove, I think it was. And as somebody dressed up as a dove would walk across the Piazza San Marco on a tightrope. I think there was a disaster. Someone fell, and they turned it into a like fake paper mache pigeon thing instead. And then I want to say in like 2002, it started up again as a person, but this time they were like strapped in, because apparently they weren't strapped in the first time.
Yeah, classic.
Well, it feels like what's his face right on top of the Twin Towers.
Famous guy.
Yeah,
I don't remember his name.
I guess he had been strapped in. That'd be crazy. That'd be unhinged if he was not strapped in. But maybe he was.
When? Which person?
The guy walking across, the French fellow.
They made him do it. He was going to do it unassisted, essentially.
Because I thought he did the Notre Dame unassisted.
I think he did several without being without
attached.
any safety precautions. Yeah.
And then they were like, no. I only remember because I don't actually know what he looks like. All I remember is Joseph Gordon-Levitt playing him. So sort of all I can think about. Wire? No, that's the TV show.
Man on a Wire?
Man on a Wire. Maybe. Because the other one is just about The Wire, which is a very different thing. You're like, when is he going to walk across the wire? There's a lot of drugs for this guy on a wire. So I apologize. Again, off topic.
So my question was, whenever they revamped it in that a person was going across Piazza San Marco, was it someone who was tightrope walking? It was a person who was not hang gliding. What's the word?
Hanging off of a rope kind of thing. Like,
what is that thing called? I've done that before.
A pulley?
Like
zip line? Zip line?
That's what it is. Yeah. It was kind of like a zip line situation.
Yeah. Okay. And we actually were a bit bummed. It did not happen this year. We were expecting it because they were on a program released before the Carnevale that was supposed to happen, and it didn't. It was supposed to be on Sunday, and it never happened. We couldn't, and nobody else seemed to expect it. It was also not even on the program that they published during the day of, so we weren't sure if it was cut or if it was paused this year for some reason. But I apologize. Going back very quickly just to the origins of it, it used to start on Santo Stefano, which is the day after Christmas. We did talk about this in one of the Christmas episodes. arguably in Italy or most of Italy, the day after Christmas is more popular than Christmas Day itself, in the sense that things will be open Christmas Day and nothing will be open the day after Christmas.
So Christmas is very popular, but people take a vacation the day after on Santo Stefano.
And I think it's just more celebrated in terms of like there's a lot more of like joy. I think Christmas Day is a bit stressful for everybody. So I think the day after everyone's like, oh, thank God it's all over. We can just like chill out. And it used to be Santo Stefano, so the 26th of December, all the way until what is called Shrove Tuesday, which is a fun word I found out about only like 45 minutes ago.
Shrove is a great word.
It is a great word. And that is, for those of you who are like me and who've never heard of Shrove Tuesday, that is Mardi Gras, which is a day I have heard of. So the reason I wanted to bring that up, though, is because if you are planning this, if you're planning a trip for Carnevale, I did want to interject a bit of real life useful information, I think, which, not that Shrove Tuesday is not useful, but I don't think I'm ever going to use that knowledge again in my life. However, it is important to know that because it is now, I would say, like, as you mentioned earlier, it's got a less religious flavor to it. It's more just a party, have fun, go do things, dress up. So it doesn't start the day after Christmas necessarily. It starts kind of like a few weeks before Mardi Gras. This one I think next year is going to start January 30th, January 31st. And then this year started February 22nd. I have no idea how this works. It's supposed to be like the Tuesday before Lent. I don't know when Lent is.
I think it was the 21st.
21st this year?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the reason I mention that is because if you are planning to go to Venice on those days, it is basically, it seems to start on the Saturday, whatever Saturday that is. It's almost always starting on a Saturday. It seems like in the last couple of years, it started on a Saturday. This year, it started on a Saturday. Next year, it's going to start on a Saturday. So with that being said, it starts on a Saturday. And the reason that's important is because the hotel prices essentially on Friday night are really expensive going into that Saturday. They're pretty expensive Saturday to Sunday, and then they're pretty expensive Sunday to Monday. But they completely fall off Monday night, that week before the next weekend, basically, even though there isn't necessarily a lack of Carnevale stuff happening.
There are still events happening. I do think there are more on the weekend.
For sure.
And we'll get into like the Arsenale Water Show. Yeah. That only happens on the weekends, I believe. There are certain events that only happen on the weekends, but there are certainly events throughout the week.
So if you're basically like, I want to see Carnevale, I've always wanted to see Carnevale, but I need to do it on a budget, I cannot afford a few $1,000s, then it's possible to do it during the week. Like just as an example of money spent, we went to Venice for, I think it was 3 nights, Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night. Mm-hmm. And we found the cheapest hotel we could. It was about 120 euros a night. So I think, no, it must be more than that because we spent about 450 euros at the hotel. So that was terrible math. It's 170 a night, I guess then.
Was it that much?
Something in that range. It was quite pricey because we spent about 4 and change. And then we never went out to eat for dinner because it was, I think we've talked about this in the last episode. It really does feel like you're spending a minimum of $20 a person. Even like a plate of pasta is usually 15 plus the coperta is like 3 or 4. I mean, if you have a bottle of water, which you're going to have something to drink probably at dinner. So it ends up being about 20 a person. We didn't do that. Instead, we did the cicchetti, the glasses of wine, the finger food, the slices of pizza here and there. But I think we still spent about $1,000 all said and told, which does include the trains there. So if you take out the trains, it's probably about $800 for 3 nights we spent in Venice, which isn't terrible for 3 people. Of course, that would not include...
For 3 people.
What am I talking about? Yeah,
I'm like,
for 3 nights.
Who was there with us?
For 2 people, that's worse, but still not terrible. It does not include your flight, obviously. But I just wanted to throw that in there because sometimes we had a lot of trouble finding information about the Carnevale, specifically like what to expect in terms of pricing, what to expect in terms of spending money, what to expect in terms of events happening. And we had this thought that it would be run effectively. And then we got there and realized that we're still in Italy and that Italians, bless them, have no idea how to run things. And I love that about it. But there's no, like, they'll tell you there's going to be thousands of shows all across Venice or all, in the city. And then it's not until like almost when it happens that they give you the names of the people who will be doing the show, but they don't give you like what they actually do. Like, this person's a puppeteer. This is a musician. This is a stand-up comedian, only in Italian. So
for example, we tend to not plan that much. We're not highly planning trip people. However, I really wanted to know and like get the full experience of Carnevale. I really wanted to know what was available to see and plan out what I wanted to see and make sure that, we could be there for it. And I would say almost up until a week before Carnevale was supposed to happen, there was not specific information on the official Carnevale website. They had certain things like when the, the Parade of Boats was going to happen, and that is actually before Carnevale actually starts.
So I think the Parade of Boats is on the 15th. Carnevale actually started the 21st.
21st, I think. Mm-hmm. And they also had information about when the Marys were going to be chosen. We'll get into this in a minute, but there were essentially a couple things that they knew were going to happen on these dates. And other than that, they could tell you some of these things are going to happen at some point in the future. And so there was no way to plan on what we were actually going to be able to see when we were going to be there. So we just we planned a trip knowing that the Carnevale roughly was going to start at this time, and we'll see some stuff. But there just wasn't a way to really plan on what we were actually going to be able to see.
That's the, not the issue, but I think that's the problem.
That's the Italian of it all.
That's the Italian of it all. No, I mean, if you're coming from the States or Canada, the UK, even Australia, God forbid, because that is so much farther away. I mean, in the sense of, I feel like it's such a long flight that you're like, you really want to know what you're getting yourself into. And I will say here, just very briefly, because you're 15 minutes in, hopefully you're still listening, that you're going to have fun. I mean, it's a fascinating event. It's just everyone's dressed up. There's I don't know, like the costumes, the masks, the whole atmosphere of it feels very festival-like. There's a lot of, we'll get into this later, but there's a lot of fun food. And so I think you're going to have fun no matter what. However, there is a bit of stress, I think, around the fact, as you mentioned, that you aren't going to know exactly what you're getting yourself into until the day of. And as you just mentioned off mic, for instance, we did see a fun band one night getting a slice of pizza. They were amazing. They were fantastic. And we saw a lot of it is also, I don't know if it's Carnevale for kids specifically, but I think on Saturday, if I'm not mistaken, of this year, it was or maybe it was both days, but it was a lot of the shows are kid-centric in terms of, I think one guy he did a solo play, but he did it with puppets.
He's a puppeteer. Mm-hmm.
But it's like, not like tiny puppets, like big puppets.
Yeah. What are those called?
I don't know. I guess they're just giant puppets. Darcy's looking lost and anguished. But no, I mean, like in the sense of not full body puppets, but like sort of the half size. He wasn't really a ventriloquist so much as, that was, I mean, I think there's an idea that he might have been one, but it was more of just, he was talking to himself with a puppet. It was very fun.
But also the puppets were weird and kind of creepy in a good way because they were paper mache, and I'm not sure if he made them, but they were definitely handmade and weird and cool.
They were fantastic. I mean, there is a feeling, again, going back to that Renaissance fair idea, there is a feeling where when you're walking around, I think Venice and the Carnevale, that you're very much walking around like, there's a sense that we're going to try to make it feel like what it would have felt like, even to the point of the stages are very, very simple wooden stages with a red cloth hanging behind them. That is like
one of the main comedians who she and another comedian were kind of the host, the MCs of the whole thing. And so they were at the main stage, which is in the Piazza San Marco, and she was talking about these stages, and I can't remember what time period she said they're from, but she said specifically these are essentially replicas or versions of the
That's what made sense. Okay.
17th century, 18th century stages that would have been there in some of the original Carnevale.
That makes sense because they have very much a feel of like, I mean, without trying, we can do better now kind of thing, but the point isn't to make it look better. The point is to make it look like, you are walking around and there is the guy who goes from town to town with his puppets doing a show for kids, and he makes the collection of lira or whatever it would have been in the Venetian Republic.
I do think they, for all the things that we're complaining about, or not complaining, lately,
listing,
yes, saying like it wasn't highly organized or things like that. There weren't lists of what you could see. I think part of that is because the organization that puts this on, they want to make things feel like you're just wandering into a piazza and discovering this magical thing.
Yes,
so I do appreciate that, but I had to let go of my FOMO.
Well, I think that's a very good point, because it is, on one hand, I 100% agree. I think they are trying to create an idea of mystery, like an air of mystery, an air of wonder, Like you went from one piazza to another, you stumbled across all these beautiful, amazing shows, you had a great time. And on the other hand, it was only, I think, 5 or 6 piazzas that are not necessarily super close together. So there's like one near the train station, and then there's one near Piazza San Marco, and there's one in Dorso Duro, and it's kind of like, oh, they're not really, I mean, they're close together. It's on a 20-minute walk of one another kind of thing, but not like one tiny piazza and then you walk for 2 minutes and you find another show and another band and another performance, or there's an Aerial Silks performance that we missed, unfortunately. There was all these other little tiny things happening, and part of it too is simply that even on the, I mean, not the brochure, because it was so hard to find it even on the website what was happening, but there was no little like just explanation next to it, because I'm also thinking with kids, there are some kids who prefer, I think, the musicians, and then some who prefer the plays, because they're very child-friendly plays in terms of like, it's fun, it's over the top, it's exciting, it's like I mean, as a kid, I think I would have enjoyed that quite a lot. The Aerial Silks I would have enjoyed, but as an adult, you might enjoy other things, especially if you speak some Italian, because like I said, there are some, like, I think stand-up comedians would be the best way to describe these people. It's sort of like, they're stand-up comedians, but they speak in Italian.
A major part of Carnevale is comedy.
Yeah.
Was kind of a lot of the acts, and like I said before, the two MCs, the two hosts, who are very often at the main stage, are comedians, and they would do like silly little bits, and they were clearly improvising, but they were also supposed to be listing the events that were going to be happening. They were hosting the mask competitions and also being just silly and trying to hype up the crowd. So
most of it was insulting the crowd, which I really enjoyed, because the crowd is supposed to cheer for which one they liked more, and then people weren't cheering, and they're like, this isn't a joke, you need to cheer. Like, we need you to cheer. Like, if you're here, you need to be cheering. It was a very like,
well, because they needed, specifically in this instance, the crowd was supposed to be judging who was the best of the mask competition, and I think, and they were saying it in Italian and also English, but a lot of the crowd just was not, like, they were just there watching. And so Nathaniel and I were like, whoa, like really clapping, trying to participate.
Crowd,
exactly, because you're supposed to be judging who has the best mask. It's all in good fun.
It is. And as I will say too, just as a small thing, the actual mask competition is judged by a group of I think it's like artists and fashion designers and a few other things.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So what we watched, like, there's a mask competition for best mask that happens, I think, 2 or 3 times a day. And it's always different people. And it's basically, I mean, so if you're listening to this, it can be you. There's no, like, you know, limit to entry.
And in fact, we were watching one of these, it wasn't the mask competition. They were doing a dance, of like a period dance. And just before that, the comedians were chatting and talking to people in the crowd from the stage. And they were saying like, hey, you with this incredible mask, go sign up for our mask competition so you can get, you don't have to be picked out of the crowd, but sometimes they will tell you like, you're great, come sign up. And you can just go to the back of the stage, sign yourself up for the mask competition and be part of it.
And this kind of actually really nicely brings us to our next part of why you might enjoy Carnevale, because the mask he was wearing was a box over his head where it was his own YouTube channel. And it looked like it was basically, he must have a talking head YouTube channel, because he dressed up as his YouTube channel. And the two MCs thought it was great, so like, go sign up for it. And part of this is, and I guess like I'm tying this in because a lot of people were dressed up as anything. One guy's walking around as Shrek. A lot of people were dressed up as just like, I mean, I think 2 people were dressed up as like toy soldiers or something. I mean, it was just anything you wanted to dress up as.
I think somebody was a panda.
That sounds about right. Well, there's also the bunch of kids who are dressed up as like astronauts and samurais and ninjas or whatever it is, you know, you get from the costume section at the grocery store, because I feel like that's here. It's just like, go get the costume. Like, I was like the 1970s.
Oh my goodness, the amount of small dogs we saw in costumes.
10 out of 10.
That was one of my favorite things.
Huge part of why we went, in hindsight. But no, I wanted to also mention too, because even you mentioned the period dance. It was supposed to be a dance from the time of Casanova. A little sad. One guy did not have a partner, so he had to sit out the dance. So we had to watch him just watch the dance. But just before that, there was a best dressed Casanova, like, not impersonator. So
this year's theme was Casanova. Every year has a theme.
Okay, because I think next year's is Casanova too.
No, it can't be. It was just this year.
Well, I looked at the 2026, and it was like, next year we're going to explore like life of Casanova and so. So I'm wondering if they just wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Oh, we'll do Casanova again. What a great theme.
That's weird, because it should be that every year is a new theme.
I'm hoping that it could be that they have updated the dates and have not updated the theme.
Okay.
Because if you look at the best mask competition of the last like 20 years, they do seem to have each of them has a different theme. And I only say that too because if you are somebody who wants to dress up as Casanova, you can absolutely go on the stage and be awarded a little medal that says Best Dressed Casanova. If you wanted to dress up in costume, I think a lot of the costumes are obviously like Carnevale inspired, so the masks, but not necessarily like there's nothing very specific about it in terms of if you have a mask and a costume, absolutely welcome on stage. The crowd will cheer for you. It seems like a fun thing to do. Just if like, I mean, one group of people that dressed up for this event was actually from North Carolina because they spoke into the mic and they're like, we're from North Carolina. And I'm like, that's crazy. We're from Georgia. Like we're both across the world here. But no, I wanted to throw that out there just because if you are listening and you're, if you're in the States, basically, I know that Halloween's a big time of year for a lot of people because it's a time to dress up. It's a time to
love Halloween.
Yeah, well, I think we know people like adults especially who go all out, like whether it's the house, whether it's the inside of the house, whether it's their costume, like they plan all year. At the same time, there's a lot of cosplayers who do the same thing. They spend a lot of time and money on cosplay. And like, there were people dressed up at Carnevale in cosplay, which was, I mean, major props to like you have to send all this or bring this stuff with you and not have it damaged. But it genuinely seemed like a time just to get dressed in something and have fun and do stuff and be out and about. So I just basically want to throw that in there in case anybody's listening, just like, oh, I love dressing up. I love doing stuff. Then it does seem like maybe it's worth it to go to Carnevale for middle of February.
Absolutely.
Or next year, January.
If you're like, Darcy, Nathaniel, this sounds amazing, but I don't own my own costume for Carnevale, or I don't want to bring my costume. Fear not. You can rent them. And also, I don't know if we mentioned this, but the masks, Nathaniel and I got masks, classic Venetian handmade masks, and they're not terribly expensive. I got one for my niece. I can say this. She's not listening. She's small. And so I got one for her that was 18 euros, I think.
It's supposed to be a gift, which is why you can say it, right?
Yes. Sorry. It's a surprise gift. That's why.
It's not like illegal to get a mask for your niece.
Yeah, no. I just didn't. It's a surprise for her, but she's not listening. So it's still going to be a surprise.
She's also like 4 and doesn't have a concept of gifts yet, but she's getting there.
She does have a concept of gifts. She's very smart, and she's 4. So, is she 5? No. So
hopefully she's not ever going to listen to the episode. She's like, she's flaming
5
me.
Now. Okay. Anyways, I got one for her that was 18 euros. We got one that was 24. I think. 24. Okay. But I had this idea that before we went that this was going to be a major investment because I really wanted a handmade mask, and they're, I think, completely affordable for a nice souvenir. And you can rent costumes from several different mask and costume shops that are really cool and made in Italy, and often so that you can get costumes that are based in different periods, so they're not all the same, and I feel like they're between 200 and 300 euros ish.
Some of them rent. Are a little closer to 7 and 8.
Yes, some of the really elaborate ones. Yeah.
But actually, if I may, you brought up 2 things. One thing on the costume, well, we can actually get into that in a second, but is you will need a costume if you go to a ball, and we'll get into that in a second. But on the masks, that is a great thing to point out. I was going to kind of go into that. I would think it'd be fun to talk about masks as their own episode at some point in the future, just as a fun little mini-sode or just a little bit of because we don't really do too much history, but I think it's one of those things, those aspects of Italy or Venice specifically, that it's so just interesting. And it's also one of those things that when you look at journals of mostly young men in the past doing the grand tour who went to Venice, there's definitely an expectation of everybody in Venice will be masked up the entire time. And of course they get here and are super disappointed. Not here, I guess, Venice, because we're not in Venice, but here, Italy. And they're super disappointed. But
these people on the grand tour?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I think you're expecting
I see.
Masked assassins. But the masks are fascinating because obviously they are not only a part of the Carnevale, but they're also part of Venetian heritage. It's a huge thing there, obviously. But as I just said, as a brief little interesting thing is they really only became a certified guild for it in the 1400s. In the 1500s, I was actually, I think there's in a Venetian museum, this little piece of paper or papyrus, or I don't know, probably not papyrus, that'd be weird, vellum, I imagine. And it has the list of the basically the licensed and bonded mask makers, maschieri. And one of them is a woman, which is really exciting because it's, I don't know, a lot of the guild members from back in the day, when you look at these artisan guilds and the stonemasons and the painters.
They didn't let women in.
Yeah.
Even now, it's a big thing that there are female gondoliers.
and there's like 7, and people are over the moon that there are 7. That's a whole thing. I also want to get into that because I think that now
that's a different episode.
It's a different episode, but I'm fascinated because I'm hoping like now we have only a bag that we can like ask somebody like, we actually work for this Italian travel podcast. We like to ask you some questions because I'm so curious about gondoliers in general. Like, how is the pay divided? How do you get started? How difficult is the test actually? Because I mean, like it's supposed to be difficult, but I'm like, I've heard also the London cab driver test is super difficult because it used to be you had to know all the streets, and it seems like the gondoliers is kind of the same thing. You have to know you have to know some basic history. You have to know all the alleyways, all the streets, all the canals, as well as know how to do the one-handed thing, the technique. And they talk about how difficult it is. But even the guy, when he was like the president association in that article from 8 years ago, he was talking about how it's like, it's not that we don't allow women. It's just that some things like understanding weather patterns are really difficult. And I'm like, but like not like more so.
We both rolled our eyes so hard.
For women, for like
women can't understand weather patterns.
Like
doesn't
there are
make
clouds.
Any sense.
Like I don't. So all that being said is I really want to know more about this, why it's so difficult. But all that being said is the masks are fascinating. They have a whole history, and in fact, there were a lot of laws around like when you can't wear them. Specifically, gambling was not allowed in Venice except during Carnevale, which we'll get into a second because there's a famous casino that Darcy wanted to go to that we did not go to.
We didn't have time.
We didn't have time, and or money.
It's not that expensive.
Well, no, but it's just like,
but I don't have gambling money.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right. You don't have gambling money.
But once we have gambling money, then because it's like one of those things, you think if you pay for it as an experience, it's better than just thinking you're going to make money from it. But there was a lot of laws of like, because at the time masks were used for everything, whether it's for basically pretending you were somebody else or hiding your identity. So you can go out, especially if you were from a higher sort of, I don't know, class of society, you can go out as somebody not that high class in case you needed to do either nefarious or just, lighthearted things without people knowing. But I think it's fascinating. The reason I mentioned that, though, is the masks did start as leather, porcelain, and glass, and paper mache. Now, most of them are paper mache that are traditional. You can, I think, find some, because when you do look at traditional masks, some people do make them in porcelain, but that is the few $100.
Leather is another big one. A lot of the classic shops in Venice that make them there do have some leather masks. They tend to be a little bit more expensive. I also imagine that if you wear them around, they tend to make your face more sweaty.
Yeah, for sure.
Just as a note, but they do exist.
And that brings us, I think, like kind of, because I don't want to get too much into masks. To me, they're fascinating. I could really spend the whole episode on it, but all you need to know is that people, yes, they will walk around people will walk around in masks in Venice during Carnevale, but you're not going to be like, I have glasses, so I'm not wearing glasses over a mask. I'm certainly not wearing glasses under a mask. It was not working for me. Some people it worked for. I'm like, that sounds awesome. That looks cool. You do that. I was looking like a goober walking around trying to do mask and glasses.
But I know we've talked about this, but I love so much that regular people dressed up in wild costumes in public, full of confidence. Like, it just made me so happy to see people being not weird. I say weird in a good way, just confident and dressed up as someone else. And one of my favorite people, I wish they'd had like Instagram handles that I could follow.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite 2 people were, I want to say in drag, just because of their costumes, but sort of it's classic to gender swap. Is one of the classic parts of Carnevale is if you identify as a man, you dress as a woman. If you identify as a woman, you dress as a man. And I love that. And these 2 people were just in fabulous costumes and really working the crowd, and they were incredible.
And as like that's a huge part of the history of the masks is actually, interestingly enough, again, we'll get into this in another episode, but it was illegal to gender swap because it was being done. Like basically like, no, you can't do that. You can't gamble in a mask. You can't gender swap in a mask. You can't do, there's like so many things you couldn't do in a mask. And then, which is weird. It's like,
that was dictated by the church, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it got to the point, obviously, where it's like the only thing you could do in a mask was just be in a mask. And then, of course, this Austrian fellow was like, well, how about no more masks? And
how about no fun?
Yes.
Is what he said.
The Austrians just went downhill from there. But interesting, that brings us to our tips, which is, I think the first one is not even tips. This is not even a tip. It's just more of a thing that we recommend you do, but is to buy a handmade mask if you're going to buy a mask. There are about 2.5 billion mask sellers on the streets in Venice selling the plastic masks. And yes, they are so much cheaper. They start at like €5 and then they go to like €25 for the really elaborate ones. but they are plastic. They're not made there. You know, they're made like, some of them I think actually might even be made in Italy, but not necessarily like traditionally. They're just plastic, you know, glued together masks kind of thing.
I would guess that almost none of those are made in Italy.
Well, I was thinking sometimes there are very sadly, like, people think made in Italian goods are like really high quality, and then you realize that the North has a bunch of sweatshops, and you're like, oh. So this is taking a really sad turn, but please don't buy sweatshop made goods.
Yes,
sort of like the point
these
of this.
masks might be made with forced labor, which is terrible.
Yeah. So there, in the description, we'll have links to some traditionally made masks, handmade masks that are made with paper mache, or it's kind of more like, I always thought paper mache as a sort of strips of paper. This is more of a paper pulp that is pressed into a shape and then painted and then glazed, I think, in some sort of glaze. So it's a bit, the front of it is like plasticky, like waterproofy, plasticky. That way it doesn't get too wet, but the back of it is still like raw paper.
And at a lot of these shops, they have workshops for making your own. I don't know that you can make your own paper mache. I think it's decorating your own, but that's quite cool too. I mean, obviously they were slammed on the day of Carnevale. The 3 days that we were there, they were all like, everybody was in there making their own mask. Like, there was so like cute. Different, it wasn't just like a free for all. It wasn't grab a mask and start painting. They had to like sign up for the class or whatever. And it also wasn't just kids, which I think you can kind of assume sometimes with craft workshops. It was mostly adults, which is really cool.
And no, so that basically the tip is simply just, if you can, if you you know, and basically if you're on a budget and you're listening to this and you're like, ooh, that's tight, I do recommend just us. I mean, it's basically the difference between €5 and €25 is the difference between just a kind of a plastic mask that's going to fall apart, and it's, you know, it's cool, I guess, but it's not really like a piece of history or memorabilia. And then €25 for one that is made by hand, made in the traditional style. It's very cool. I don't know. I always try to convince people to get the stuff that's artisan made. We're both artists so you're actually an artist. I'm a writer. That doesn't count. But you're an actual real life artist. So it's always big to kind of like, I don't know, try to get the things that are made properly. And plus they're just such a cooler bit of I don't know. People often like on the Italy travel subreddit, a lot of people ask like, what can I bring back as a memento? What can I bring back as gifts? What are some things like, I want to remember this trip to Italy, but I don't want to bring back like a t-shirt. And I think that, you know, a Venetian mask is a great thing to bring back. They're obviously open in the summer too. So I was going to say, these places are open year round. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you're not going for Carnevale, they are open year round. So you aren't going to be missing on anything, I don't think. And then the next one is the balls. Like you mentioned, paying for this. I want to go to a ball one day. Yeah. But they're expensive. Yeah, they are a couple €100 per person per plate. And I would recommend, maybe if you're like, yeah, a couple €100, that's nothing, I can do that, to look at photos. Definitely look at photos. We can't personally recommend any of them because we have not been to any of them, but you can see photos of several of them that are open to the public, meaning the public can pay for a ticket to get in. And there are some that look cool from the outside, but then look kind of sad on the inside, in that they're highly decorated, very cool, but just the vibe is a little... Well, there's some of it's supposed to, like, the photos are these like super sexy, mysterious, like, not that people are sexy, but like, wow, right, the vibe, like, this is like a Casanova party. Well, that's a sex party, but that's, you know, like, I mean, like, it's sort of like, it's candles and rose petals and wine and masks, dark and like velvet, and then you see the photos from people who are there, and you're like, ooh, that is like a 5,000 Kelvin bulb lighting up a dance floor. I mean, they're not bad. Some of them aren't bad, but again, I love Italians. I really do. I love that we live here. I love the Italians we know. And sometimes when it comes to interior design, they don't have that as a skill. Yes. And then the people that are hired for the interior design jobs are specifically the people that do not have that as a skill, because it's always like, everything we've gone to is a big event. It's always like bare bulbs, super bright light, nothing. There's no setting the scene. There's no like nothing. However, Venice does seem to have a better vibe and better interior design and better sort of general nice aesthetic than some other places. For sure. And there are some balls that do have that deep, dark velvet and leather and cool chandeliers and candelabras vibe, but I highly recommend you look up photos of these balls before you go. We don't want to spend €600 on a ticket to go to a ball that like feels like you're on a cruise ship ballroom kind of thing, and not like the Titanic cruise ship ballroom, but like Carnival Cruises cruise ship ballroom.
Yes.
That's kind of what we're hoping you avoid. So now that we're done flaming that, moving on to our next one. I'm leaning away from the mic to read my notes on the computer because I didn't want the crinkle of paper, and I did not foresee the fact that I had to lean away from the mic to look at
Also, if you
notes.
listened to our last episode, neither of us could read Nathaniel's notes.
Yeah, that was a disaster. I need to learn to write better. So there are some actual, I think, tips, but the other one that's kind of related specifically to Carnevale was that if you are going to dress up, and I mean like as anything, there was a couple of people we saw that were like, okay, they were dressed up. They had a mask on and they had like a cloak, or they had a mask and something, it was, yeah, you made an effort. But a lot of people would come up and just take photos of them or put their arm around them and take photos without saying, hey, do you mind if I take a photo with you? Or no kind of communication.
We talked about this in the last episode too.
And I wanted to mention this one in case you didn't listen to the last one, in case you don't listen chronologically, just listen to the ones that you like.
Yeah, totally.
The name of. And part of it is just simply that if you are dressing up and in the spirit of Carnevale, I think we actually, like I said, we talked about this in the last episode specifically, but there's still that sense that, there's a overwhelming sense that Venice is a theme park. And there's that like, oh, this person dressing up is for me to take photos with. It's not for them to have fun at a party. So we saw a lot of, whether it was like young women taking pictures with other women dressed up, or whether it was like men just kind of running over to women or other men and putting their arms around their shoulder and be like, photo. And it was just maybe aggressive isn't the right word, but it was certainly very assertive, very forward.
I would say it was aggressive.
Presumptuous. Okay.
Yes, presumptuous is a great word. There were a lot of people going up to people in costume, people not costumed, going up to people in costume to take a photo with them without asking, touching them on the arm without asking, not hugging them, but doing like a little side hug for a photo without asking. And certainly a lot of people who were dressed up knew that was going to happen, were totally okay with it. Some people would even position themselves in places to take photos, like near a statue. There's a couple lion statues kind of just off the piazza where people would go and stand in costume specifically to be there to take photos. These two people in drag who are amazing, they were in a crowd of people working the crowd. They were prepared to take photos. I still asked. I highly encourage you to ask to take
even if you just hold up your phone or camera and kind of just like questioning
exactly,
look,
exactly.
Because I will say a lot of if I may interrupt, a lot of performers don't speak.
They can't because they have a full mask on. We can hear some people trying to talk to like their friends and family with the mask on, and it's just like you can't hear them through
it's
the
impossible.
mask.
No, so I said performers. They're not performers. They are just people, but they are in a costume. But yes, they will, a lot of them are not speaking. They're sort of, everyone's pantomiming. And I will say, again, I'm interrupting, apologize, but it was a kind of a beautiful thing because at the same time, when you saw the interactions between two people who like neither from Venice, neither spoke the same language, and they're both just really excited to be there, and they're both like, let's photo. We both, especially because there were people who dressed up taking photos with other people who were dressed up.
Yes.
Neither, Venetian. And it seemed really beautiful. It genuinely seemed like people were just having a blast. Like, oh my God, we're like in a city surrounded by people who have the same sort of enjoyment, basically. And that was really exciting to watch. And it just also felt like some people were there sort of like, this will look good on my Instagram page. So there wasn't a question. There's a lot of presumptiveness. And then there was like, no, thank you afterwards. It was just like, okay, we're done. Goodbye.
I also recommend if you are coming to be dressed up, especially if you're going to be in a full face mask, that you have someone with you who can speak for you.
Yeah.
Several groups that we saw did have that. Like often it was a couple and then clearly the parents of one of the people with them. And sometimes it was important because it seems as though the mask with your whole costume is kind of difficult to take on and off.
Yes.
So some people who were in costume wanted to take a gondola ride, but because they couldn't really easily take their mask off, they could not effectively communicate with the gondolier in order to arrange a ride. So they needed some support from their family and friends to help them negotiate certain things and talk to people.
Yeah. If this is something that sounds exciting to you, if you like dressing up and your partner doesn't, maybe your partner could be like your quote unquote handler, or if, again, your parent or friends, if you're going to go a couple of friends on a trip and one of you don't want to dress up, perfect. That person, if they can just, help, because it seems like it goes smoothly, especially too. And I think you already mentioned this, but just even with the photo taking, if somebody's there to kind of be like, okay, now we're done. We're going to move to the next area. If you want to take photos, you can keep following us, but we're done. Because I think we mentioned in the last episode, there's one person on stilts that didn't have anybody with them. And it was just, they were mobbed with people who want to take photos on stilts. And I think people realize you should not touch the stilts, but some people didn't realize you should not touch the stilts. So they were like going in to put their arm around the stilt, and it was like, oh, what are you doing?
Right.
This person could fall. So that's a fun little tip. All of these go really dark. I apologize. So that was that. But no, that is a big part of it is just that. Some of the other tips I have are a little less, I think, Carnevale related. They're more just like general things you should or should not do, I think. Again, please interrupt me if you think of anything that's Carnevale related specifically. But one of them was don't stop on bridges. I think that was just, we talked about this last episode. That's a great tool for any time of thing in Carnevale, but specifically Carnevale, there's a lot of people taking photos on bridges, obviously. There's a lot of just, everything's ganged up there. But I think that one for me was more a safety thing. Like, if you're going to get pickpocketed, it's why you're standing still, super distracted by the view or taking photos or doing something and not paying attention to what's going on around you. So it's sort of like, don't stop in places that are high pickpocketing points, such as the bridges, even Piazza San Marco. Be kind of aware. I don't know. I mean, it seemed like nobody, when we were there, it seemed like that was in our vicinity screamed pickpocket. So that was nice. So, again, it was more of a festive thing. But I'm always just trying to be aware of these things, I think, is a big one.
I have two tips about Carnevale.
Okay.
So one is that you and I, because we did our research, we knew that the most activity for Carnevale would be happening around Piazza San Marco. And that is often that's obviously where the main stage was. That's where the two main comedians were. That's where the only information essentially for the sort of rough schedule was. It's on the screen at the main stage. And that is where a lot of people in costume go to take photos and hang out and experience the Carnevale. However, like we did mention, there are pockets of the different little piazzas where different acts were happening throughout the days. And you and I happened to be walking on a street just because I think we were looking for pastries.
Classic.
That's classic us. And we realized that it was a great spot for people watching. And do you remember the name of this road? It's a wider street.
I think it changes like 6 times. I think we were on it called Strada Nova, Nova, like supernova. So Nova Street.
Okay. And it goes essentially kind of from the train station over into Cannaregio, right? The neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it was a great spot for just watching, like walking down the street and watching people come in costume. It was really, really cool. And my other tip is that it seems as though the weekend before Carnevale officially starts, there is a celebration in Mestre. And we've talked about this neighborhood before. It's the inland neighborhood next to Venice, essentially. And it is often less expensive to stay over there than it is in Venice. And the weekend before that, they have what I'm going to call a dress rehearsal sort of festival, which is it seems to me maybe a bit more for locals than for tourists, but it's basically a mini Carnevale. And it's part of the whole celebration, but there are obviously people in costume, there's street performers and food, and I had no idea that it existed until we went, and I found out that it had happened in the past. And so it just could be a cool option if you want to be a part of Carnevale, but you can't get to Venice the weekends and the weeks that it's happening. It could be interesting to plan for the week before that in Mestre.
And that's a very good point. And I was going to say also, we did very briefly mention, and then we kind of went off topic, but going back to it is the Festa della Mary. Mary.
Is she Mary or Marie?
I want to say it's Marie, but it could be Mary's.
So my middle name is Marie. And it bothers me when people mispronounce Mary, Marie, or Marie, Mary. Anyways, that's my own problem. But obviously Maria is the Italian name, but when we were there, I kept seeing it written Marie.
Which I think is the plural of Maria. I know.
Oh my goodness.
I'm like, these French people saw that.
That is blowing my mind. Wow. Okay.
So it's basically, there's a whole like fun history. It's like 12 young women were kidnapped by pirates, and then somebody paid for their return, and then now we celebrate them because when they came back, we celebrated them. Now it kind of feels like it's a beauty pageant because it's like the city gets together and decides on the 12 most beautiful Venetian young women, And then
Yeah.
it seems a little weird, but
It's cute, but a little weird.
what's also, it seems very, again, it is I love Italy, and this is a very Italian thing where it's not separate. Like, we've talked about this in the past, and we'll talk about this more probably in the future, but like a lot of Italian celebrations, especially religious ones, which this isn't religious, but this one has the most air of religiousness than the other ones. But there isn't a separation between people watching and people, and for lack of a better word in this case, performing. Mm-hmm. It is very much like they arrive on a gondola, and you're not on the gondola with them. But then as they're walking through the street, there's not like a barricade to prevent you from accosting them. Mm-hmm. And after they go on the stage and they, I don't know, they wave to the crowd or something. We weren't there for that part.
They do several different things throughout the days of Carnevale, but a lot of it is a sort of like a princess walk, like a hello, we're here.
Well, then they just go to a cafe and sit down outside without, again, not like there's no barrier. It's not like, I don't know. I guess it always blows my mind because I feel like in the States specifically of this sort of thing, we'd be like, no, you can only get so close to them. Mm-hmm. There's barricades or handlers
weird.
or something.
So because we just didn't get there in time, we missed them being on the main stage. But then you and I were wandering around near the Grand Canal, which is just around the corner from Piazza San Marco, and we happened to see them all sitting, like you said, at a cafe or a restaurant, and people were mobbed around them taking photos, and these young women were just having lunch essentially. Yeah. And we're not performing at that time, but no one was keeping other people from taking their photos and sort of being way too close to them while they were just trying to have lunch.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's what that's where I kind of, when I mention these Italianisms, it's weird. It's hard to explain, I think, until you're in Italy or you've seen it the same thing over and over again, and you realize, oh, that's just. It's like the programmers would say that's not a bug, that's a feature, and I feel like that's it in Italy. It's just like, oh, that's intended. Like this is and it's an interesting. Because we've seen some celebrations that you should not be that close to anything, and like it's just whether it's this tree ceremony we saw years ago, or whatever it is. It's just sometimes there's these like there should be more separation here. Yeah. Like we should have a barricade in place. Like we shouldn't get this close because I think again we come from the States and even the parades we come from in Savannah where. Like, you can't just be on the street in the parade.
I think one thing we've talked about before is that there's this really cool festival near us, and it's the
in Italy?
Yes, okay. The Principessa di
Costanza,
thank you. And there were these really impressive fire dancers and fire breather people,
yeah, exactly.
And they were incredible. But we were all certainly way too close to them.
Well, because they just started up in the middle of the street, and they're like, anyway, so we're going to start, like, lighting stuff on fire. And we're like, oh, we should move for this. And like, you don't have to. I'm like, no, we should move for this.
So you're right. It is a bug or a feature, whatever it is. That happens here often in Italy.
And as another tip, I wanted to, I love it. I just sort of just, there's no segue here. So
no, just tips galore. It
is. Well, it's also too, I feel like sometimes like, oh, they edited it. Nope. This is just me pretending that we're segueing. You mentioned it's kind of briefly off mic as well before we started the podcast, but if you are dressing up and there is a different outfit for Carnival in Brazil as there is from Carnevale in Venice.
Yes.
And Venice does have a no bathing suits in town rule. You cannot walk around in a bathing suit, men and women. You have to actually be in real clothes, and you can get fined for being in a bathing suit. I only mention that too because if you are going to dress up in sort of the bikini outfit that you kind of see in like the Brazilian Carnevale, like all the dancers, that might actually get you fined in Venice. So that is just something to be aware of. Like there are just some weird laws to be aware of. That's all. And we try to cover them, and we'll cover them more in the future as well. And on the website onlybag.com. So as you're going, that is something to be aware of. One other tip, not even a tip I had, just a little piece of information, is the Arsenale Water Show. Mm-hmm. I think we already talked about that briefly, but it is a new thing. It's only like in the last 7 years or something like that it's been happening. So it seems really cool, but also you and I did not go. We were planning on going, and then the ticket price for being like front row to the show and then back row to the show is like $4 difference. Mm-hmm. And we had waited. We didn't realize you had to get tickets, I think, and so we didn't. It was a whole thing, but we didn't want to get tickets for the very back row because you're at bleachers a good distance away from where the front is. And we're like, well, if it was only like a €4 difference, we should just wait until we can get the front row seats. And then it was too late. And then we're like, okay, next year. But I mentioned that because it's not like some traditional classic water show thing that you're missing. It's a fairly new event that's only been happening for 7 years, I think. So
it does seem cool though. It's like an acrobatic boat water play.
Yes. And it seems fantastic. In case you're having also, like us, a bit of FOMO and you're like, oh my God, this thing that's been happening forever. It has not been happening forever. It is fairly new, but it's still very, very cool. And I still think it's worth going to. So I think that's everything for tips.
Yeah, I think so. I think we should just mention some pastries.
The most important part, and really the only reason I think you are all listening to this episode, is the pastries. There are 3. The Fritelle, the chiacchiera, which is actually called the Gildani or Gilani in Gilani. And I could have probably double-checked the pronunciation before starting this episode. I think it's Gilani, though, but it's what you just call chiacchiera. And then there is another little thing called castagnole, but I've never really heard them or seen of them. They're kind of small fried balls that are then not even with sugar on top, not
Dusted
powdered
sugar?
sugar. Well, is it dusted when it's
like granulated sugar?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sort of like the Fritelle, though, granulated sugar.
That's true.
And the Fritelle are fantastic. Imagine it's fried dough.
Amazing, you guys.
Really, we again, this is one of those things where there's so many things about each different region that we didn't know a lot of the stuff going into it. And one of it was just looking for cheap eats in Venice. And I stumbled on this Reddit thread from like 4 or 5 years ago. And on this, somebody was like, oh, but if you're, talking cheap eats, you do need to get pastries. And he was talking about the Fritelle. And I was like, oh, so I was looking this up and it was like translates to pancake. And I was like, well, I'm not getting pancakes in Venice. It is not a pancake. Terrible translation. I don't know what they were thinking. It's essentially a fried dough ball. Mm-hmm. The traditional one is made with pine nuts, raisins, in most cases, grappa as well, and lemon peel. And then I think it's a yeast-based dough though, so it rises, so it has more of a yeast flavor than a baking soda flavor. Flour, fried in oil. I mean, it used to be butter, lard, or oil. Now it's just oil, and then sugar, and that's it. And then of course that's the Venetian style. And then there are some of the Venetian ones do have little bits of apple in it as well. And then some of them have the zabaione cream or the chantilly cream or, chocolate or
pistachio and chocolate, which we didn't try because those seemed more like they were filled with a filling that was made outside of the pastry shop, where the zabaione, which is the flavor
of zabaione,
and so that was made in-house. Obviously the cream is made in-house. So we ate our weight in Fritelle.
Yeah. I tracked I was trying to do this little calorie tracker thing on the well, I didn't track my calories, but the iPhone does it when you walk around. They'll be like, you close your loop today. And I have it set at a very moderate 200 calories of walking because that's pretty much all I ever want to do. And so I think we were walking an average of like 10 or 11 miles a day, plus up about 10 flights of stairs while we were in Venice because of all the bridges. So it was like, oh, you burned, whatever. It's like 700 calories today. And I'm like, I did not. I ate about 18 Fritelle. That is way too many.
Oh my gosh, they're so good.
They're about only like €1.50, €2, maybe €3 the most. And they're everywhere. And we'll put in the description, not just some of our favorites, but the favorites.
Also, we should say they're about the size of a lemon.
Yes.
It's the closest sort of general thing I can think of. Okay.
Yeah. No, I think they're the size of lemon. So, and Darcy and I would split 1 or 2. So it's kind of, if you're going with somebody, it's even better because that way you get to try I might as well try 3 of them because you're really only having 1.5 when you split them all. Again, this is how
we were rationalizing it.
We were super rationalizing it to ourselves. But it's probably the best treat because we've tried the chiacchiera. It's essentially, imagine a sheet of lasagna that's made sweet instead of savory, and then it's fried and dusted with sugar. And if you're thinking, that doesn't sound very good, you're 100% right.
I think they're good. It's like a fried sheet of dough with sugar. Yeah. And it's fun.
It's fun.
It's not the best thing in the world, but it's fun.
It's a thing.
Okay.
I don't dislike it, but it's just like, if you have to have a dessert, which you do, let's not be crazy, and you have to have the calories, which you apparently cannot avoid when you're eating desserts, then that's not where I'm going.
Yeah, if you're someone who is tracking your sugar or calorie intake, it's not worth it. If you don't care about it, you should try one.
Well, I guess I don't care about it that much, but it was one of those things where I'm like, I'm going to feel, it's like I know just oil. It's just oil and fry, which is not a thing. Yeah,
that's what my body thrives on, so I'm not really sure why you're
criticizing
me.
Like one of those biodiesel Mercedes. Yeah. I've converted to biodiesel.
I just run on potatoes and oil.
So, okay, you like them. And then we also have, and this one's in Florence, is a little, kind of like the castagnole, but they were filled with rice instead, which is kind of an interesting surprise.
That was not my favorite.
Yes, because I think everyone's surprised when it's rice inside of a dessert. I mean, which to be fair, I thought it would be rice flour, so I was like expecting light and fluffy and something interesting, and then I was like, "Ooh,
It was
it's
heavy and oily.
yeah, filled with." Which is there are a lot of rice desserts that are actually really delicious, especially in Italy, but that was I think just unexpected, and it was a bit old too, so it was kind of cold and then rice. It was like cold rice.
Yeah, it wasn't ideal.
I'm not making
But that
sense
was
of it.
not Venetian.
But the
so don't worry.
Fritelle were absolutely worth it.
Insane.
Yeah, and we'll put
and yes, you're gonna say we're gonna put in the description
Yes.
places. And also we're going to be writing an article sometime soon in the future for our top picks on where to get the best Fritelle. And this is specifically what we're listing as Carnevale pastries. So these
Yeah.
are not all year round pastries.
And I think that's the good thing to add in is that from what we found out is, and just like, and we've talked about this 1,000 times, Italy is very serious about their seasons, whether it's seasons of baked goods, whether it's seasons of chocolate, whether it's seasons of anything, obviously like vegetables, which have natural seasons, but I also named things that don't. But no, Italy has a lot of seasons when it comes to food, especially baked goods. And this is very specifically kind of a post-Christmas Carnevale. It seems like springtime in general, but still, I imagine outside of Venice, if you're staying like Mestre or something, it might be a little less common to see it that wider range.
And also we don't have these in the south. This is
Yes.
very much a Venetian and Veneto, is that the region?
Yeah.
Pastry.
Yeah, which is really a bit of a bummer because we have worse pastries in the south.
We still have donuts. We have zeppole.
Yeah, honestly, but somebody's gonna like send us a message and be like, let you know, zeppole are not actually from the south; they're from, I don't know,
But we
Emilia
have them in
Romagna.
our town, and I like to eat them on Sunday mornings when they make them.
Yes, but
So,
because they are fried in oil and made with potato.
yeah, exactly. Thank you for acknowledging that.
So yes, that is the delicious part of your celebration in Carnevale will be the Fritelle. If you can eat, if you're gluten free, I am so sorry. Honestly, I am tragically sorry. It is not just because you can't have the Fritelle, but because there are very few gluten free pastries in Italy. And I mean, there's some that are naturally gluten free, and one day we really should do an episode on it. But like just because it's interesting. And there's some made with only almond flour or only hazelnut flour because that was, or chestnut's really popular, especially in the South. A lot of pastries are just made with chestnut flour, especially when chestnuts are in season. So you can avoid gluten quite easily. But if you, I don't know about that in Veneto.
Yeah, me either. But we should research it and do an episode.
Absolutely. So that being said, I think that's...
I have one more tip.
Yes.
It's just that I think we mentioned this in the last episode, but it was very, very crowded when we were there.
Slammed.
In fact, it was interesting because in Piazza San Marco, I thought it would be body to body. And you could walk around pretty freely. It was crowded, but you could walk around pretty freely. But because there are only so many streets you can take to certain areas, you do end up being body to body, packed like sardines and wiggling your way through the streets. And I just wanted to note that if you're stressed out by that, prepare yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
That is something that stresses me out very much, but I was able to get through it. And there are lots of other neighborhoods in Venice where you can go that are free of tourists, that are just open. You can wander around in the quiet and get away from the crowds. So you just need to wander away from Piazza San Marco. The neighborhood Canareggio, right? Had quite a lot of lovely, very quiet places.
I think it's Canareggio that has the one strip of all the restaurants along the canal, and then you step right off of that street. And it's just, deserted practically. And even that strip though was really quiet. Like it was, there's essentially all these restaurants on the canal, just to explain it to people listening. And we thought they would all be really wildly expensive, but they were all of them incredibly reasonable. That didn't seem to have a sit charge. At least the places we went for coffee and Cicchetti didn't have a sitting charge. It was just sort of like, yes, it's €3, but if you sit, it's still going to be €3. Unlike most of the restaurants in the city where it is a pretty hefty difference between sitting and standing. And I think this, if I may make that as a note, we talked about this in the last episode, but if you are wanting to go to pretty much any cafe, there is a different charge for standing and taking a coffee, or pretty much anything, and sitting. I say coffee specifically because, if I'm not mistaken, the last time we've researched this in depth for an article that I wrote that didn't go anywhere, each region in Italy sets their own price for coffee that is taken at the bar, and it's kind of a nationally protected thing. So it doesn't matter how fancy a restaurant you are, you can't charge more than that for the coffee you sell. And a lot of restaurants or cafes or bar will charge significantly less than that because, well, they want business, so it makes sense to charge less than that. So that I mentioned, I think Venice, the region of Veneto is set at $3.50, and the only place I imagine is the Cafe Florian, which is a really popular, like a famous, well-known, old school sort of cafe in Piazza San Marco. But most places at the bar will be like $1.50 or $2.
I think is what we paid usually.
I think we paid €2 for coffee a few times where there's a bathroom there, and you're like, well, you're gonna have to pay €1 for the bathroom at the train station or somewhere else anyway, so you might as well just spend extra on a coffee.
I will say about Cafe Florian that I would never choose to have anything there. However, if you're feeling fine with cash and you want to chill out and people watch, specifically in Piazza San Marco, it could be worth paying, what is it, like €25 for
I think
drink?
The coffee is $7. That's just a regular little espresso. 12 for cappuccino, 17 for cafe con panna, which is cafe with whipped cream. €20 for a beer, 17 for Aperol spritz. I'm not reading the prices. I just looked at them before we started this episode. And for some reason, that's the information that stays in my head, but not how to pronounce. Is it a Galani or Gildani or Gelani or see this? What ridiculous thing? I see these insane prices get stressed out. I'm like €17 for an Aperol spritz. It's $3.50 for like 8 meters behind them in a side street. But again, you're not in Piazza San Marco in Venice, so that's.
But if you're willing to pay that price and you really want to chill out and people watch, that could be something that you do. I have another price-related thing before we go. I
was going to say, if I may, on that Cafe Florian.
Do it.
If you happen to be in Venice and this is your first time in Venice and you're going to Piazza San Marco and you look at the restaurant prices there, to be very clear, that is not typical for, let alone Venice, but even Italy. That is insanely inflated. And I only say that because the first time I went to Venice was with my mom. We went for a fun little trip, and we knew it would be pricey, but we were like, okay, how much could it actually be? I feel like that scene from Arrested Development. How much could a banana cost? $7? That's kind of what it felt like. How much could a coffee cost? Like $3? That's it, because that was expensive. We were spending I think 70 cents at our cafe in town for coffee. So I'm like, €3 is insane. And we get there, I'm like, €7 for a coffee. Like, what did you make it in front of me? Insane. So
I mean, they do make it in front of you. They don't charge extra for that.
More like really grinding the bean picking it off the tree for me or something. Like I'm like, what am I doing? €7. So that was insane. My mom was like, we can just leave, and so we just obviously left because we were like, we can't. That's too much money. But I only say that because that was the first place we went to look, just because we're like, oh, we have to go there, and then we're like, oh my god, that's so expensive. So please don't think that as a normal price in Venice. That is absolutely the most expensive that you're going to find in Venice, let alone in even 1-star Michelin restaurants in Florence were cheaper than that. So your tip, I apologize.
My one quick, it's not related to Carnevale, but it is Venice. I just happened to cross this today. In our last episode, we mentioned that a gondola ride is €90 for what seems like the sort of basic trip. But I did happen across something today. Several different tour groups offer group gondola rides that potentially come with a short walking tour for €35. And that could be a good option for you, but just be careful about what you're purchasing, because I saw in a lot of the reviews that some people thought they were getting a personal gondola ride for that price. Some people thought they were getting a highly informational tour for that price. So just be careful about what you buy.
Especially ahead of time.
Yes.
That being said, though, if you find, if it's yourself and 4 random strangers, because I think these gondolas can sit a maximum of 5 people. I think it's 5 people. So if you guys want to split that €90, you can pay way less than 90 to have a gondola ride. So if you are looking to budget, you can go to a youth hostel and see if anybody there wants to chip in €18 a person, or whatever it is, 5 times. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not doing math. That's crazy. What am I doing? What am I thinking? But for this example, let's pretend that 18 times 5 is 90. So if somebody's listening to this,
I can't do math.
Cringing.
I'm sick, and you're asking me to do math.
I know we have a math teacher probably listening to this who just hates me. So yeah, that being said, if you want to make some friends and have a cheap gondola ride, you can also do that yourself, kind of by yourself. So I do think that is everything. I just to hit the really too long didn't listen is essentially. If you don't go specifically for the opening, you will still have a lot of Carnevale fun. You can absolutely dress up. You can get masks there that are handmade, that are not very expensive. You're going to have a blast. Please ask before you take photos of people. People will not ask before taking photos of you. And have a fun time if you go. It's genuinely worth it. Even though it's in February, it's genuinely worth it to go to Venice for that. And if you have some extra time, consider the fact that while really there's no more off season in Italy, like, I mean, things are just slammed. February is going to be really cheap in other places. Like we spent, I think, like 100 and something euros per night in Venice, and then we went to Florence afterwards and spent, I think, 72 euros a night.
Even though it was incredibly touristy at that time, there were a lot more people in Florence during February being tourists than I expected.
And but also the hotel was right in the middle of town, and it was super cheap. So that is something. Oh my God, I'm sorry. 18 times 5 is 90. What a...
He just checked on his phone calculator.
What a math saint. What is this? I am so impressed with myself right now. I mean, nobody else should be impressed with me, to be very clear, but I am impressed with myself. I did check on my calculator. I was watching it be like 108, and I'm like, wow, I was really off. But the point is, yes, that if you're already getting the time off and you're only going to go to Venice for a few nights, because once it dies down, it can kind of, I imagine it can be a little bit different of an experience, like from the weekend to the weekday, but it's worth it going the weekday. And if you have time off, it's totally worth it to then check out the rest of Italy while you're there. This year specifically is the Jubilee in Rome. Things are going to be a little more expensive than they would be normally, I think, just because of the Jubilee. So people are going to be visiting Rome. There's going to be some spillover in Florence because of that. There's going to be some spillover in Naples because of that, and Siena, obviously, because that's near Florence and it's near Rome. But if you're basically planning to go to like Milan or something, there's going to be probably less spillover on a whole.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
So,
but absolutely worth traveling around in February, even though it's chilly.
Yes, it was a lot colder than I thought it would. But if you own a cloak, ideally of wool, and you'd like to bring it to Carnevale, you will fit in perfectly. I do own a cloak made out of wool, and Darcy insisted that I bring it. I said, Darcy, don't be silly. No one's going to be wearing a cloak there. We get there, and it's like every other person was in a cloak, and mine would have been the coolest. I mean, not really. Actually, some people had really cool cloaks, but a lot of people wear essentially what is a plastic tablecloth. Yeah. So I would.
And yours is very cool, and it would have been dope. But
I know mine's very traditional. Apparently, according to Luigi, he's like, my grandfather had one of those. That was his going out jacket. I'm like, that a wool cloak was his going out jacket. Oh my God, this man.
Because he was really cool.
He was the headless horseman, apparently. So I think that's everything for this episode.
I think so.
We've tried to cram it in, but essentially, go for Carnevale. You're not going to be disappointed. It's a blast. Have fun. And if you have any questions, genuinely let us know. We'd be happy to answer them. We don't know too much about Carnevale specifically, but if you are having trouble finding information, we can try to guide you towards information. A lot of this we will try to create as articles and put up on the website. But if you have a question, or if you want to know, like, is this worth it, or is that worth it, or should I try this, or how does this look, something like that, let us know. We're happy to help. We're happy to answer your questions. And with all that being said, thank you all so much for putting up with Mr. Nathaniel and 5 cups of coffee, rambling and just going along.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can email us at onlyabagpodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Blue Sky at onlyabag. You can look at our website, which is onlyabag.com, and comment and not comment. You can contact us there. That's what it is. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can absolutely sign up for a newsletter. We have not actually sent out a newsletter yet, but we will one day when we have more stuff to talk about. Yes.
I think we just don't want to overload your inboxes with stuff.
So thanks for listening.
Thank you all so much for listening.
Tanti abbracci.
Until next time.